what's really the difference between college practices and the NFL? Because I would think that the NFL would be tougher, but not according to Gibbs here.
No, it's not. I mean, it's maybe tougher on you mentally as far as what you're tasked with being aware of, knowing the changes that you make week to week, especially in season. And sometimes you'll just, especially even in game, draw stuff in the dirt or make some changes kind of on the fly, where it's a little harder to do that at the college level, given what you're asking young men to do at that time. But look, here's the hard part about it. Because, look, he didn't get recruited by Nick Saban, initially, right? He was transferred. He comes in there for a year. Obviously, he had a lot of success into being a first-round pick. They highlight him. But he got a dose of what it's like to try to survive in a culture and a team that's trying to stay on top of college football, because Georgia's had their number the past couple of seasons, along with maybe some other teams, making ground on them. And that's how Nick Saban likes to do it. But Nick Saban's been very successful doing it. I think there's a certain element, too, of having to kind of build some grit, some callous, some toughness at the college level, where especially today, and you see this more and more, kids are kind of anointed based on their star ratings when they get there. And they really haven't done or accomplished anything. They've just beat up on the kid who happened to play, tackle, for example, that's never going to play football again the rest of his life and segue into some other career. Yet because they were so dominant doing it, they're a 3-star, 4-star, 5-star kid. It's like, let's pump the brakes. In college, you start to really find out what you're capable of and develop into that sort of player and prospect. So there's probably a fair amount of like, hey, this kid looks good on tape in high school, but so do a lot of kids. We got to put him up against the best that we've recruited and see what he's capable of. So I get what Nick Saban does and is trying to do, and a lot of other coaches have the same mindset. But an NFL practice is entirely different. I mean, there's some coaches who are like, it's all about like the risk reward, and they want zero risk. So everything's almost a walkthrough, or they're never in pads. They don't hit anymore. And that's changed a lot over time. It didn't used to be like that. There were times where coaches would punish you in the NFL and you'd be in pads on a Wednesday instead of, being in shells, which is just helmet, shoulder pads, shorts, or just, shock vests and your helmet and all that, which is really kind of like t-shirt and shorts and helmet. So, there's coaches who would punish you in that way and be like, all right, you want a reward, like go win a game, and then you won't be banging the next week. So it all varies, but it's not surprising to hear someone speak out. I'm surprised it's like Jahmyr Gibbs, a guy who was like just with Bama, just with Nick Saban, and a team who, obviously has had a ton of success.
The other thing too is like you now see Sean McVay, Brandon Staley both do this. No preseason whatsoever. Although Brandon Staley, oddly enough, like played his guys in a meaningless game in week 18. But the point being is that I think coaches have sort of look around and see how, to Brady's point, risk reward. If you play your guys in preseason, if you run them hard in practice, not only are you going to risk injury, you're going to risk the possibility that these guys might be like go up against a team that isn't, that it's going to come in fresh. And, and so I think that's you're also dealing with professionals. And then when you talk about the depth, professionals versus amateurs, young, college kids who are typically going to be less inclined to get to do what they're, the younger kids are going to be less inclined to do what they're supposed to do when they're not there in order to be ready for the game. And then the other thing too, Nick Saban, if he runs Jahmyr Gibbs into the ground and Jahmyr Gibbs gets hurt, well, guess what? There's another 5-star right behind him. At the NFL, you don't have that. You don't have that. Like, you look at Josh Jacobs. They ran him into the preseason late. They played him in the Hall of Fame game in the second half last year. It's like, dude, if he gets hurt, you got nobody else. Everybody thought they were cutting him or trading him because of that.
Do you feel like sometimes this seems like a shot at Nick Saban, which is maybe a little bit different, but sometimes these rookies start talking to the press and they say things that put a huge target on their back. Like, what was it, Justin Fields in preseason a couple years ago that said, oh, this is easy, or I don't know what he said. And then he became like target number one the next week. This kind of comment to be like, oh, it's not that bad. Is that something where people are like, oh, I'll make it bad for you then?
It's called a rookie mistake for a reason. I mean,
yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's part of it. I think that plays a part and a role. And look, I mean, Will said the formula earlier. I mean, you draft a running back in the first round, you're going to use the crap out of him. So yeah, they might be protecting him now in practice, but when you get into the season, like, dude, it's 17 games. You're going to be a lot of touches. a lot of catches, a lot of carries. I mean, that's what they're expecting out of you. So I mean, look, you just want to get to the season as healthy as possible. Like the last thing you want is someone getting hurt in practice. That's literally just, or even outside of that, you know, OTAs this time of year where it impacts your team. But NFL practices are as difficult as you want to make them. So, you know, some teams don't even condition, right? So like in between, you know, periods where maybe you're involved, maybe you're not, you know, sometimes because again, the roster size is smaller. In college, you might never see the starting defense the entire week because everything's platoon. So you have a scout team you're working with on offense and defense, and you're in separate fields the whole time. Now, sometimes you'll have some competitive periods. In the NFL, it's not like that. You know, you've got some guys on offense who are going to have to play or backups on scout team and service the starting defense, and then vice versa. And so you're kind of, you know, mixing and matching throughout the course of practice throughout the course of the week. And every once in a while, you have some good on good periods as well, but usually not that often during the season. So in order to make it harder, like you've got to condition in between drills. You've got to take it on yourself to get in more throws, get in more reps, and do the things you need to do if you want to make it a harder practice. So I would say that's the biggest difference in the NFL is it's a big boy sport. Like basically coaches are there to help you understand the game plan, go out there and execute, but ultimately you're responsible for getting yourself ready for the game. In college, it's entirely different. Like I think you go to college and like you learn how to actually learn, you know, like you understand like how you absorb information, how you apply it in class, also on the playing field too. And so those coaches are kind of there molding you more than when you get to the NFL, where they're more kind of there to help just facilitate like what you're capable of and help you get to that next level.
Well, and it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense too if you think about it. Like in the NFL, you are a paid professional. If you continually show up and fail to execute your job responsibilities and fail to like do the stuff off the field to be ready for game day, to be ready for your job, your bosses are going to take notice and you're not going to get paid. Like in the NFL, you're looking for that contract. In college, you're like trying to grind through class. Like you've got classes, you've got football, like you're doing all this stuff as, you know, as an amateur, and it changed a little bit obviously with NIL, but you know, there's just you look at college coaches too, and you see the guys who do it, like the Nick Saban types who have the heavy structure and it's more of a grind than it is in the NFL, where again, everyone is expected to show up and be professional about their job.
And that's the last thing I say really quick. Sorry, is, you know, at the college football level, it's, you know, there's two elements to it in my mind. It's making sure you feel like your players know what they need to do in order to execute. And I also think there's an element of coaches needing to see out of the players what they think they need to see in order to feel prepared to go win. In the NFL, it's entirely different because you can have the worst week of practice and you get in a game and someone balls out. Or you have a guy who's like not even able to practice and is a game time decision, hasn't done anything all week, and he goes in, he plays, and he's a superstar, right? Like it's so different in the NFL. So there's, you know, as a head coach, I think you kind of have to be able to be like, hey man, I know if he's there, he's a gamer. We're going to use him if he can make it. If not, no big deal. I don't need him to practice during the week, right? And so there's just an entirely different mentality, I think, for head coaches in the NFL to feel good about things going into a game as compared to college coaches. Like college coaches need to be like, man, we had one hell of a week of practice. All right. We were just banging and there were sparks and stuff flying and we are ready to go. And then you roll out on a Saturday and lay an egg, right? Like that's just how it works. But in the NFL, it's like, it's a big boys league, man. Like work hard, play hard, whatever that guy needs to do to get himself ready. We've heard about other star players and some of their pregame routines and the way they would go about preparing themselves to play. That's real. Like I knew guys who had, let's just call it unconventional ways of preparing themselves to go play. And those guys were studs and they were very good. So like, you didn't question it. You're just like, do whatever you need to do to go out there and play well.
Well, yeah, I would say too, you know, we're talking about the union has made a difference in terms of how these guys approach it too, because there's no union in college football saying you can't practice as much. Like off-season activities have been shrunk back a lot from the last 15, 20 years. And as such, you know, under these new CBA rules, you know, you see like Robert Saleh canceled voluntary like off season, like, or the mini camp or whatever. I mean,
yes and no, though. The NCAA is limited a lot
Sure.
of really what can happen. And look, universities don't want to be abused by that with social media and all the stuff that's going on too. That is not as egregious. Now, the ability for players to hit, that's been adjusted and changed. And so there's a little bit more discretion on the coach as far as how they want to do it. But look, I've also had coaches tell me this. They're like, the last thing I need is a player to not be in full pads and then something happens where they get hurt, where a pad, something would have stopped, like a deep thigh bruise, something would have stopped, however it works out. And the other thing is like, you really, and if you ask a lot of O-line coaches, D-line coaches, they'll tell you, if you're not in pads, it's kind of hard to get real work done sometimes, like especially for those guys. And so, there's varying opinions on that. And at the college level, look, you're in a developmental sport still. Like even in the NFL to some degree. So you need that time kind of hitting and banging in order, especially for the big boys, to continue to develop their skills. A little different for skill players.